Chapter 15. The following morning, Nick arrived at the station with one of Chase's Haysdale High School yearbooks. He didn't bother to ask Chase if he could borrow it. The less Chase knew about the case, the better off he would be.
Just take your time. He's got to be in there somewhere,
Nick told Howard. Nick watched Howard study each faculty member's picture in an attempt to identify the man he had met with at the school.
None of these men look familiar,
Howard said, handing Nick the book through the bars. Nick was hoping that Howard could recognize the man so he could make an arrest and wrap up this case. But obviously, that would have been too easy.
Did you check the entire book?
Nick asked.
I'm telling you, the guy I met with is not in there. Besides, how much longer are you going to keep me here? I've got my rights, you know.
Howard said, returning to his cot.
I'm fully aware of your rights. Until you give me something I can use, you're going to continue to sit right there.
Nick said, tossing the yearbook onto his desk.
I'm sure he knows I've scammed him by now.
Howard said under his breath, but loud enough for Nick to hear.
Yeah, I'm sure he's pretty ticked off about it. So what do you think he's going to do? Let me check my messages,
Howard said, getting up and returning to the bars. Nick pulled his desk drawer open and took out Howard's cell phone. Just as he suspected, the display showed 4 new messages. Nick wished Michelin could have used her scanner to tell him who had made the calls and what the calls were regarding. But the thought of her made Nick wish that she was just there. Howard paced back and forth as he listened to the messages. The agitated expression on his face told Nick that something was wrong. Ending his call, Howard yelled, throwing the phone through the bars.
What happened?
Nick asked as Howard stood there stiffly, his mind reeling with some horrific thought as he stared down at the pieces of his shattered phone.
Were there any messages from your contact or Jacob Larson? No, just messages from Riko.
Howard said in a hollow tone.
I thought the names weren't important in this game.
Nick reminded him.
His name is. Can you transfer me or cut me a deal or something? Who's Riko Arjela? Riko was the arresting officer in my case back east. Because of him and his fake evidence, the judge sentenced me to 10 years at Kirk. What are you saying? Riko's a dirty cop, and the department knows it, but they're not going to do anything about it because they're working for him. So what does he have to do with the case?
Nick asked at length.
Riko investigated a drug bust. It went bad. Word has it that $2.3 million worth of drugs confiscated by the department came up missing. He's got this guy named Vincent, and before you ask me his last name, I don't know. But he and Vincent were partners, and they were supplying Rex. But the shipment in the box that Rex dropped off to you was watches. I saw them. Obviously, you didn't look in the bottom of the box beneath the watches.
Nick went and got the box he had locked up for evidence. He opened it and took out the plastic-wrapped watches and set them in a pile on the desk. Why hadn't he noticed the false bottom in the box before? Taking the pocket knife from his pocket, Nick carved into the box. There inside were 6 small plastic bags. 3 of the bags contained crystallized chunks, and the other 3 contained white powder.
How did I miss these?
Nick asked, carefully placing the box and its contents back on the desk.
Now do you get it, Sheriff? I was supposed to drop off that package at Haysdale for Scully to have his runs distribute. But because of you, they think I double-crossed them and handed Rex over to you. Now they're looking for me. Okay, let's back up a minute. Who was on the phone? I told you, Riko Arjela. He called from New York? Yeah, he said he just got off the phone with his partner Vincent, who's supposedly somewhere here in Texas. Somebody told Vincent that Rex got arrested. Vincent called Riko, and now Riko wants to know where's his money.
What were the odds that his little sister Lainey was engaged to a cop named Vincent Hebert from New York, who recently moved to a small town in Texas? Nick couldn't help but wonder. He knew there was something he didn't like about that guy. But for Lainey's sake, Nick owed it to her to find out if his suspicions regarding her fiancé were true before he told her.
How does counterfeiting fit into this? I've got a source that says this kind of activity has been traced from Virginia all the way here. Is there any connection? The only thing I know is that money was made to purchase stuff to be sold for a profit, and a lot of people are getting paid to keep their mouth shut. Not Charlene Berta. She's the one who contacted the government in the first place.
Howard laughed.
Well, the feds haven't caught up with her, they're not going to, especially if she's got Riko's money. Does she?
Nick asked.
How would I know?
Howard shrugged, returning to his cot. There were a lot of questions buzzing around Nick's head. But one question he couldn't shake, and that was whether or not Charlene Berta took Riko's money before notifying the government with intentions of pinning everything on him and the others. Nick picked up the pieces of Howard's cell phone and put it back together. Once done, he put the bag containing the phone into the drawer and shut it. That evening, Nick sat on the edge of his bed. His conversation with Howard had been all he could think about. What if the real evidence he had been trying to gather led him right to his own family? Nick sighed as he went into the kitchen to feed the empty rumble in his stomach. There stood Chase, peering down into the refrigerator, looking for something to eat.
Hey, Dad.
Chase said, finally settling on a bologna sandwich and some potato chips.
I didn't know you're still up.
Nick said, fixing a sandwich for himself.
Got an algebra quiz tomorrow.
Chase said, stuffing a chip into his mouth.
How's it coming? I wish it was next week.
He said, followed by a bite of his sandwich.
That reminds me, Miss Keeler told me she wants to speak with you. When? At the parent-teacher conference on Friday. You never said anything about a conference? I thought I did.
Chase said simply. Any other time, a conference with one of Chase's teachers was usually tough on everybody involved. But this was the perfect opportunity for Nick to enter Chase's school without arousing any suspicion as to why he was there. Feeling like this was the break he needed, Nick couldn't help the grin that came over his face any more than he could help the laughter that followed.
You're happy about the conference?
Chase looked confused.
Why wouldn't I be? Okay, Dad, whatever you say.
Chase laughed.
By the way, how's Ripa? How should I know? She hardly said 2 words to me all day.
Nick knew that it was way too soon to celebrate. After all, Ripa and Chase had been on the outs before, and now they were engaged.
Not that I'm trying to pry, but what happened? I suggested that we wait to get married, like you said, and she totally flipped. I see.
Nick said, feeling like a heel for being happy when the reason for the conflict was because Chase had finally taken his advice, and it backfired.
Maybe she's just thinking over what you said. I doubt it. Anyway, I've got this quiz tomorrow, and I can't even concentrate. Do you need any help? No, I don't need any more help.
Chase said, carrying his empty plate to the sink. Then he left. If Chase thought he was feeling bad, that was nothing compared to how Nick felt. As much as Nick would have loved to see Chase and Ripa call it quits, he didn't want to be the reason why. That night, while waiting for the gentle cycle to finish drying his uniforms, Nick heard a knock at the door. He glanced up at the clock. It was 10:20. Who could it be this time of night? The question formed in his mind as he pushed himself away from the kitchen table. Nick went into the living room. Having looked through the diamond-shaped window, a smile came over his face. He opened the door.
Hello, Sheriff.
Michelin said with a soft, silky voice. The porch light captured the auburn strands of her loosely curled hair. Seeing her standing there in her gray pantsuit with a white silk blouse underneath, Nick got the impression that she was coming from or on her way to someplace important.
May I come in? Yes, come in.
Nick chuckled to hide his embarrassment for staring.
I'm sorry to stop by so late. I was hoping that you would have come by the office today.
Did you miss me?
You like touring with me, don't you?
Just a little bit. Michelin smiled as he laughed.
So, what does the sheriff do with himself this time of night when he's not on duty?
Before Nick could answer, the dryer buzzed, telling him that his uniforms were dry and ready to be ironed.
What was that?
She asked.
The dryer. I've got to iron my uniform for tomorrow.
You? She giggled playfully.
Are you making fun of me again?
No, I'm not, she said, trying to cut her laughter short.
I'm just having a little trouble picturing the sheriff of Boyd County ironing. Those uniforms aren't going to iron themselves.
Nick teased.
Would you like some company? I'm pretty good at fluffing and folding. I've got it. Well, you could keep me company.
Nick said as she followed him into the kitchen, where she sat down at the table.
Would you like something to eat or something to drink?
He asked, setting up the ironing board.
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Having Michelin there while he removed the clothes from the dryer and carried them over to the ironing board made Nick self-conscious, as if he were all thumbs, trying to do something he had never done before. Not only would she be expecting him to iron in front of her without burning himself or his clothes, but she would be expecting him to listen and acknowledge every word she was saying. After a long, tiresome day, it was more than anyone could pull off. Yet he managed to listen attentively as she filled him in on the highlights of her day. That is, until he started telling himself that this moment was too perfect. Nick had wanted to see Michelin again since the last time he kissed her goodbye. The love they shared that night made him feel as though he had known her all of his life. There was an incredible bond that connected her to him now. It was the same bond that made him ache with need and sadness when she wasn't there. It was all he could do but to lead her to his room and pick up where they'd left off that night. Nick. Hearing her just now, Nick realized that she was waiting for his response to a question he hadn't heard.
Yes?
You weren't even listening.
What can I say, Michelin? I still can't get over the fact that you're even here.
Careful, Sheriff. You're not out of the doghouse yet, she playfully warned.
I'll keep that in mind. So, what did I miss?
I was just saying that I have to go to D.C. There's a flight leaving San Antonio at 3:20 in the morning.
You're driving to San Antonio tonight? That's about an hour drive from here.
Nick said, putting the iron down on the ironing board. If only Callahan was big enough to have an airport, she said with light laughter.
Why are you leaving?
I got a call from the senior director of SID. He said he needed to speak with me first thing tomorrow morning. I really should have left already, but I didn't want to leave without saying goodbye. Was Michelin scheduled for a meeting with William Corder? Nick wondered. If so, did it have anything to do with the conversation he had with Brett the other day? Having finished his ironing, Nick laid the pressed uniform across the back of the chair.
Did he say what he wanted?
I'm sure it has to do with the case. Anyway, I'll be back in a couple of days.
Michelin.
Yes?
This man. Who is it?
His name is William Corder. He's Brett's boss. According to William, Brett will be there also.
There's something I have to tell you before you go.
Nick said, struggling to find the right words. What is it?
I spoke to William Corder the other day.
Really? I didn't even know you knew him. What did you talk about?
I needed to know if Brett really had the authority to close the businesses here in Callahan.
You went over my boss's head? She asked, as her gentle expression went from disbelief to the brink of outrage. You asked me if Brett had the authority, and I told you that he did. By going to Will, you not only made Brett look incompetent, but me as well. How could you do that? Are you purposely trying to get me fired?
That's not my intention, and you know it.
How would I know that? From the very beginning, you've done nothing but resent my being here. And now you do this? She asked, trying to keep her voice down for the sake of his children. Yet that didn't stop her from making her way to the door.
Michelin, wait.
Nick went after her. What is it? She stopped, turning back to him.
I needed to know if Brett's motives were professional, or was it just personal? He's still in love with you. I think you know that.
You don't know what you're talking about.
The question is, are you still in love with him?
Why do you keep asking me that? Especially after we've
made love?
How could you?
How could you think I'd ever try to hurt you?
I don't think that. I just wasn't expecting any of this.
I'm sorry, but I did what I had to do. I hope you can understand.
I've got to go. Goodbye, Nick. Michelin said, placing a kiss on his cheek and making her way out to her car. Nick wanted to go after her, but what could he say that he hadn't said already?